the manipulation could be seen as covert, right? Because if you confront the mother at this point, she's just going to say, I'm not doing anything. I'm just sharing with you how I feel. That I'm going to miss you. Why are you so sensitive? You take everything so personally. So that's the covert nature.
Right.
You also
right.
mentioned the ego, right? See, that's the grandiosity again. That's the structure that holds every type cluster of narcissism together. And you do hear that. The grandiosity is what? That the mother's needs should actually take priority over the daughter's. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In today's episode, you'll hear a clip from an interview I did with Dr. Kerry, the host of the Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse podcast. In this segment, I was describing what covert narcissism can look like, not in the grand, boastful way people often imagine narcissism, but in the quiet, emotional entanglement that forms. I gave a few examples, and one example you may have heard in an earlier episode of a young woman accepted into a prestigious graduate program. When she shares the news with her mother, the mother's response quickly shifts from interest, which was very brief by the way, to emotional neediness, saying things like, we need to talk about how this is going to affect our relationship, and I just want to share my feelings. What begins as a seemingly innocent conversation about feelings turns into a subtle emotional takeover. The mother attempts to pull her daughter into a caretaking role, taking care of her mother's fragile self-esteem, rather than celebrating her daughter's success. I describe this dynamic as a symbiotic relationship where the daughter, for her own unconscious reasons, needs to people please and therefore to regulate the mother's sense of self-worth rather than being seen as a separate person with her own accomplishments. Now, Dr. Kerry actually challenges my use of the word symbiosis here. She views the narcissistic dynamic as more parasitic than mutual, which led into a fascinating exchange between us. Many people do tend to see the narcissist this way, as someone who takes, drains, and feeds off others emotionally, almost like a parasite. But I use the word symbiosis intentionally because in these relationships, both people, often unconsciously, play a role in maintaining the bond. There's a kind of emotional exchange happening, even if it's painful or unbalanced. It's not just one person taking and the other person giving. It's a shared system of regulation that keeps them both locked in this dynamic. In psychodynamic terms, this reflects an early form of emotional fusion, the feeling of, and I quote, we are one, where boundaries get blurred and each person's sense of stability depends on the other. That's why breaking free can feel so destabilizing, even when the relationship itself is so distressing. And that's something I'm going to talk about quite a bit more in upcoming episodes in terms of this symbiotic relationship and why it's so hard to extract oneself from this kind of dynamic. Anyway, we touch on so much more in this interview. The full interview will be released soon on her podcast. I'll put the link below. And I'm excited to let you know that Dr. Kerry will be joining me soon on the Narcissism Decoder. So stay tuned for that episode. Anyway, I want to get you into this segment of our interview. So without further delay, here's part of the discussion with Dr. Kerry. I hope you find it both insightful and revealing. I want to pause there because I'm trying to give you an example. I think you're getting it already just from the very beginning. Like, I just want to talk about my feelings so you could see it's so innocent, right? Initially. Like, who doesn't want your mom to talk about her feelings with you, right? But you could see how it quickly escalates when you're not there to be the, whatever theory we subscribe to, but not to take care of her mother's feelings. The mother is going to try more and more to position her daughter to what? To help her reestablish her self-esteem, her self-worth, which is to be the good mother, to always be there. The daughter's there. They're in that symbiotic relationship that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And when that doesn't happen, and this is very common, so your listeners can fill us in with any example, the things tend to escalate. And this is what we see, that it's going to ruin everything, right? And it's the worst thing that could happen. Now emotions are getting heightened. And the mother's goal, not consciously, to your point, is to put her daughter into action rather than reflection. So this is no longer about a conversation, you see? And that's now what we need to start to think about. But let me pause. I just want, because I know I'm saying a lot here.
I'm thinking of so much. For example, the first thing that struck me was here the daughter is talking about a big change in life, a big transition, which she's coming from a point of view of herself. But the mother switches it and then begins to occupy center stage. Instead of reflecting on what this means, the daughter's experience, the fears, even challenges, she then immediately goes to, it's a very self-focused, very egocentric focus.
Yes.
I think the other thing that I noticed is there's a lot of manipulation in that conversation about, you can tell there's an agenda that was going on. And the agenda is to shift focus from the daughter's needs and direction in life to the mother's losses.
Yes.
What else am I missing in there?
No, wait. Well, let's just stay with what you said, because again, the manipulation could be seen as covert, right? Because if you confront the mother at this point, she's just going to say, I'm not doing anything. I'm just sharing with you how I feel. Then I'm going to miss you. Why are you so sensitive? You take everything so personally. So that's the covert nature.
Right.
You also mentioned the ego, right? See, that's the grandiosity again. That's the structure that holds every type cluster of narcissism together. And you do hear that. The grandiosity is what? That the mother's needs should actually take priority over the daughter's. When you hear this in so many different ways, this is just one example. Another one, just very quickly, is a person who comes in very upset. Now, this is the covert narcissist, and she says, I'm going on vacation. I need a ride to the airport. Could you believe that my boyfriend is not taking me to the airport? He refused to drop us off, drop her and her friends off. And I said, well, what happened? Like, he has to go to work the next day. But she's so upset, that she has this evening flight and he's not dropping everything. And her motto, she tells me, is family helps family. Like, what kind of family is this fellow going to make? But she does not see, it's so under the surface, the covert omnipotence or grandiosity, that all of her needs should take priority. So when she starts pressuring her boyfriend now and making him feel guilty, right, which is, this example with the mother too,
right?
It's all like in the service of, but you're my boyfriend, and family helps family. You're supposed to be there for me. And if you're not there for me, then you're doing something wrong, right? So that's another thing. Yeah, so you asked me what you're missing is the implicit message. So now, if the daughter goes off to graduate school or the boyfriend doesn't come and pick her up, like an Uber driver, basically, like a part object, then they are doing something wrong. So there's another piece, is the guilt that I mentioned earlier, which is prominent with the covert narcissist. But it's so subtle because these people walk away. They really do. It's sad. When I sit with them on both sides, but when I sit with the people who are exposed to this kind of treatment, they really walk around with a profound feeling of being guilty, of doing something wrong, of being bad, not just with the mother or the boyfriend, but in life. It transitions to all aspects of their life because this is what gets internalized. Yeah, that's another piece. The other thing, I could keep going with just this little vignette, but this is also what we call an enactment, which means she pulls the daughter into playing a role for her. Now, we could say it's like the parentified, like the child is supposed to take care of the mother's feelings, but nevertheless, it's like a dance, an unconscious dance that goes on between two people. So the daughter needs to step into this as well for her own reasons, because she does not want to upset her mother and lose that special bond, that symbiotic thing that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about that. Thank you for circling back. I see it as parasitic. You're defining it as symbiotic. Let's even pause for people who don't understand the differences between those two, because I think that's really important. And then I'd love to know why you think it's more symbiotic than parasitic. So do you mind explaining the difference between symbiotic and parasitic?
You're going to have to kick it off, Dr. Kerry. What's parasitic? I'm not sure. Yeah, if you start with that, then I'll talk about symbiotic, okay?
Parasitic is essentially so if you think of, for example, this is a really gross example. Some animal gets infested with another, like with worms, for example. I have a puppy, so I'm thinking of that because I don't want my puppy to have that problem. The worm or the entity let's say ticks, that's an easier one to think of. The tick doesn't serve the puppy's health. There's no benefit to the puppy for having ticks.
Yes.
But the tick, however, though, survives off the well-being of the puppy. It's driving sustenance from the puppy at the puppy's expense. So it's a one-way direction in the relationship.
Yes. Okay.
The symbiotic to me is both benefit.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking, because is this one way? Absolutely not. If we listen to like pop psychology, it would be seen as one way, like the mother is just extracting. That's what they say about the narcissist. The narcissist is always just extracting. But if we buy into this, what we call, again, the shared unconscious fantasy, it's a shared fantasy. So they are both benefiting from this. And that's why it works so magically and wonderfully. Now, if we just stay with the surface level explanation, yes, it looks like the narcissist is just the one who extracts. But for this daughter, because she herself has, remember I said earlier, we were working already on her need to people please. But people pleasing, and I know this is very controversial, and I'm sorry to say this, but that's a form of manipulation as well, because you're not putting your real authentic self in there. You're playing a role at that moment. But why do you play a role? Yeah, please go ahead. Jump in.
Can I argue with you for a moment on that? Because I see people pleasing as an extension of fawning. It's part of the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze system. Let's go back for the sake of this example, because I think it's a lovely example. The daughter has grown up in a system where there's a profound lack of safety, continuous lack of safety. And she's learned the only way to derive safety is to fawn, which then, as you move into adulthood, looks like people pleasing. So couldn't it be seen as just her efforts at survival?
Oh, there's no doubt. Yeah, I'm with you. You're not pushing back.
Okay.
There's no doubt. And I really appreciate that. But one doesn't exclude the other. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I do see what you mean.
With the narcissist, we can make the same argument. When a narcissist is manipulative, right, trying to get the narcissistic supplies, we could say the same thing. You're describing as I would call it in my field, like a defense mechanism.
Right.
And by the way, that's a whole nother way to define narcissism, is that it's just a whole defensive structure.
Exactly.
They're doing something just to protect themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm actually in agreement with you. I think you're right. And the whole goal, yes, of this daughter is for her too, psychic survival, because she grew up, again, missing out on something that she desperately needed to survive. So now she has to figure out the best way to get that. And for her, it's the people pleasing.
Right. I think the part that bothers me the most, and we could also say this is true for the narcissistic as well. I mean, this is what's so problematic about it. It's like, it's so complex, and it's a wheel within a wheel within a, you know what I'm saying? Is that the daughter didn't have a choice as an infant to do anything but to people please.
Yes.
Let's play this out. She had a covert narcissistic mother and she fought. Then the mother would do a lot of rejecting, a lot of mislabeling as her as bad, defective, which is very damaging to an infant's experience. If she was to flee, then the mother may be abandoning. You see what I'm saying? The best course was to fawn, for her to be able to, but as you said, that makes sense, though, why you're seeing symbiotic. I'm working my way out of this conundrum, is that in order to survive, she figured out fawning worked, which is how then she got her needs met.
Yes.
Yes, there is where the symbiosis is.
If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.